Welcome to the Earthworks podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Okay, hi everybody. Glad to be here again. Welcome to the Earthworks podcast. And after a 2-week lesson in water and water quality with Dave Wilbur, I thought we'd take a little bit different tack on this and really get into something that I'm obviously passionate about. And I think you'll learn real quickly that Randy Booker with Otter Creek Golf Club is also passionate about. He's, in my estimation, he's the most well-versed practitioner of sustainable ag, regenerative agriculture in the golf market. And I wanted to get him on. I've been wanting to get him on. And Randy, welcome. And thank you for taking some time to talk to us about it. I've got a ton of notes. Hopefully we'll get to half of them. But thanks for coming on.
Kev, you are more than welcome. I've kind of looked forward to these options and these scenarios that I can start to spread the word out because, you know what, I really don't quite understand why there aren't more supers and more turf people, period, going down the same line.
That's right. And we talked a little bit offline as to maybe why, but we'll get into that a little bit more. So
yeah.
I'm excited. I think it'll be a good hour that will go in the blink of an eye. But
so looking forward to it.
Yeah. So let's start with you gave me a little bit of background offline, but let's start with kind of your background, where you came from, where you've been, a little story of Otter Creek, and you're in Ontario, Canada.
Ontario, Canada, just on the north border of Lake Erie.
Okay.
If you go take a peek at the map, you'll see Long Point, Lake Erie. Otterville is just a little north of that area. So it's the Great Lake Basin,
right,
in southwestern Ontario.
Yeah. And because I'm half Ontarian, I know that you're actually further south than I am in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. So not a lot of Americans know that, but
we're south.
Yeah, exactly.
Banana belt to Canada.
Right. That's exactly right. So your background.
Oh, well, always been a golfer.
Okay.
Loved the game of golf from, like a 12, 13-year-old kid. And I guess it started out that aspect. One of the first jobs I had was on a golf course, not too far away from where I live right now. And, 13-year-old kid going to work at a golf course. So started out, cleaning clubs, back shop work.
Yep.
The odd time it would be going over and cooking some burgers. It was a public facility, so that's just the way things worked. And then I got promoted to go work out on the grounds crew. I think one of the first jobs I was given with one of the great tools at the time was a kitchen knife. And it was, I want you to go to the greens and pick the weeds out. So there I was, 13-year-old kid walking around the golf course with a knife, picking weeds out. Of course, then that progressed to, walking the golf course with a bunker rake and raking bunkers. And then I moved on to actually riding and having the experience of sitting on a national. So those of us who have been around long enough to ride those nationals, you know what, that was, look back at that now and you go, that was great times.
Classic machines.
Perfect. So always played the game. I guess I really wanted to go the playing side of things.
Right.
High school, played in the high school team, did all those sorts of deals. And I actually wrote a few letters to a couple schools down in Florida way back at the time, that kind of had some turf along with it. Of course, I never got anything. Small town Canadian kid, it just wasn't there.
Right.
So I got into just working the golf aspect, and I actually took a year and take the school aspect up, and I went to Carleton University up by Ottawa, and I took a year of engineering. I wanted to be a civil engineer. I wanted to build roads. I wanted to build bridges. I wanted to do all that. So I think kind of a construction-y aspect was in me to begin with.
Sure.
of course, again, small town kid, I get into the big city university, and, I had never seen a computer, let alone tried to write a program for one. So that really didn't work out for me. So I took a year, I took a year off. Yeah. I took a year off and just kind of worked in landscape. Then I got into a college program at the time, which was pretty renowned from a landscape aspect. So similar, those that might be listening know Niagara College standpoint with that, the Hort end. I got into it was a 3-year college program at Humber College, and it went through landscape design, landscape construction, turf, arboriculture, you name it, anything in the hort industry, it was all part of it. But my heart still wanted to do the golf. So I kind of focused on kind of the turf end of that whole program. Mm-hmm. So graduated that 3-year program, and then I started working just as a grunt at Oakdale Golf Club in Toronto. Spent 4 years there just as a grunt, worked in the wintertime and did some things along that line. And then I got out of the golf end for, probably 6-7 years. And I went into landscape design, construction. And then I started to do residential and commercial irrigation design and irrigation installation. So I worked in that aspect as well. I soon realized that I missed the golf. Mm-hmm. So I had the opportunity. I left where I was and I got back into the golf business as kind of a second assistant, I guess, when King Valley Golf Club in north of Aurora was being built. Superintendent at the time was the assistant superintendent at Oakdale when I was one of the grunts there. So, it's 6 degrees of separation, right? You just kind of find your way around. So from that point on, I got into progressed up to an assistant superintendent position, and by 1993. At the age of 33, I had my first superintendent position, and it hasn't stopped since.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. And so fast forwarding then, when you got to Otter Creek, you told me it was under construction in 2007.
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
So tell the listeners the timeline, because it was pretty tight.
So with the Southern Ontario aspect, there's an awful lot of tobacco growing around here. And now there's an awful lot of ginseng. So it is a primarily sandy loam soil throughout. So this facility is 100% sand. I shouldn't say 100%. Initial testing came back at 96% sand to I think it was 3% silt, 1% clay.
Wow.
So primarily we are sand.
Yeah.
There was nothing brought on site. Everything that we used was mined on site. So even the greens sand was mined out of a big waste bunker. Mm-hmm. It met USGA specs, but it was on the fines end of that.
Sure.
But still drained, still did it all. So nonetheless, the whole golf course is sand. I came on board July 2007, just as the finishing details were happening, and finished it off, started to lay out the grass lines, and then seeded and proceeded to grow it in.
Yep.
So we started seeding September 5th of 2007. We finished seeding the last hole on the back nine October 22nd, 23rd. We opened up the front nine for play June 1st, 2008.
Unreal.
And we opened up the back nine, so we had a full 18-hole golf course July 1st, 2008. So it was, very. I don't
care where you are, that's a tight schedule.
Well, I'll even give you a little, we kind of laugh at this, and I just saw some pictures I pulled up the other day. So if you think about sugar sand, and that's basically a lot of what we talk about, it had no stability.
Right.
So here I am, going out to do some first mows, and I'm thinking this is going to be cool. I got a triplex to go on approaches, and so walk behinds on tees and greens to first mow wasn't a problem. But when I started to go on the fairways with a triplex, of course, reels just went and just plowed. So I was like, how the hell are we going to mow this? So I bought 3 John Deere self-propelled rotary mowers, and we set them down as low as we could go. And we had to mow all fairways with push behind rotary mowers for the first 2 or 3 mows.
Until you could get things to knit together and hold.
Exactly.
Right.
But we still couldn't take the triplexes on it. So we had to do a couple mows with fixed head walkers.
Bent grass, right?
Bent grass. Yeah. Yes, correct. Yeah.
Wow.
Bent grass, fairways, tees,
Okay.
The whole process. So, you know what? I think of a poor girl that worked on the back 9 in 2008, about 4 weeks before we opened up the back 9. Par 5, 11th hole. It took her a whole day to walk mow the fairway. So she walk mowed that fairway for the last time for a full 8 hours. God bless her. You know what? I went by and there's bananas left, right, and center. And I thought, you know what? I cannot even think about saying, you know what, girl, good for you.
How could, how could you say something after that?
Exactly. Right. But I'd been there. I had done it as well. Right. So, you know what? Your turn to do it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where it was. 2008, we opened up, ran a good staff, things were well. 25 acres of bent grass fairways, 4.5 acres of greens, and probably 3.5 of tees, and life was fantastic.
Big greens.
Yes, big greens. Oh yeah, big greens.
4.5 acres. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Wow.
A lot of runoffs.
Okay.
So front 9, more conventional aspect. Once we turn around and go to the back 9, awful lot of runoffs on greens and a little rundowns into back drainage areas and some swales and some of that. So it's kind of like 2 different 9s when you start to look at the green surrounds.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So you started out, I assume, with kind of a conventional approach to things like fertility and management, but you've obviously evolved into something quite different now. So what sparked that? Was that an internal drive on your part, or was it regulatory in the province, or was it ownership drive? I'm curious.
It was a little bit of the last comment you made, being ownership aspect.
Okay.
And not being mandated to do it. The first cause was really starting to see the deterioration in conditions of the greens. Mm-hmm. So lay it out. Conventional processes, yes. You know what? We were aerifying, we were top dressing, verticutting, we were doing, weekly, bi-weekly apps of 1/8 of a pound, 1/10 of a pound, and just that whole conventional process.
Sure.
But after 5-6 years of into that on a brand new golf course, first off, ownership came along, and business plans don't always go as they lay out. So we're really out in the small town golf course, and most people have to drive anywhere from 40 minutes up to come to us.
Wow.
So budget cuts started to come in. So obviously knocked back a little bit of staff, and then knocked back some of the inputs to go along with it. So there was those two things really sparked the movement, more so the first cause. So I think about a brand new golf course, when we opened up, and I'm sure many people who built a brand new green and seeded it, you have a rock hard, firm, fast surface.
Right.
Then you start to fertilize it, grow it, aerify it, you do all those processes to it. And according to all the turf taught academia, that's what you're supposed to do.
Sure.
You're supposed to do that, and then you fertilize it more. No, you get some disease and you spray it. And you know what? Then Primo comes out in Canada. And you know what? Keep putting the N to it and start throwing the Primo onto it so that you get a denser surface and you start to, your clippings reduce. And, maybe you don't have to mow as much if you're throwing it on fairways and yada, yada, yada. And I remember sitting in a GCS AA seminar with a good friend of mine, and this was kind of the Polyon time when it was really just being introduced in Canada, and listening to a lot of I guess the transition zone supers in the States where they're talking, and maybe the numbers were out of whack, but I swear, oh yeah, we'll throw down 4 or 5 pounds of N at a time, and then we have to pound the Primo to it to regulate it. And I kind of, I wanted to go over and bang my head on the wall, going, so you're throwing a massive amount of nitrogen on it to make it grow, and then you're having to turn around and throw a plant retardant on it to stop the growth.
Kind of like my grandmother used to drive a car. She had her foot on the gas and then she'd let off the brake to go faster. It sounds like that kind of concept.
Exactly. So those were some of the things that were going in my mind. But we'll go back to the condition of the greens really started to go downhill in my mind. Golfers really didn't notice that much, but I was having
from what respect?
Having trouble trying to get the speed up.
Okay.
Starting to have some mechanical damage issues. At the time, we had Jake triplexes.
Okay.
And just the aggressive nature of the Jake mow to begin with, right? But we started we dropped reels and they would do the little scalp, just from the weight and just from that initial, and then it ride out okay, mow good until they got up, turned around, and came back in and dropped them down again. So I started to get little mechanical scalpies all the way around the greens.
Right.
Now we were still mowing cleanups all the way around with walk behinds because we just never really were able to do a good cleanup with the Jakes. So mechanical damage started out to the fact of being, I would try and roll greens before we mowed them.
Okay.
Try to pack them down a little wee bit, try and get out of that problem. Well, it didn't make any difference.
Right.
And I'm also, ball marks were starting to really become an issue. We had the mechanical damage, and I'm going, there's something wrong with this pitcher. Greens are becoming a little softer, a little puffier, couldn't get the speed up. And that's kind of when I said, oh, whoa, there's something just not happening. Why, as a 5-6-year-old golf course, why am I sitting in this situation? I'm top dressing on a regular basis. I'm verticutting along with the top dressing, as most people do now.
Right.
I was solid tining several times a year. I was pulling cores twice, and just doing all of that. And I said,
and not getting anywhere.
Right.
Right.
So
you checked all the boxes and you're still not getting anywhere.
Yeah, I'm I keep progressing forward as we're all being told to do, but I'm going backwards in the sense of the turf standpoint. So having to spray a little bit more for dollar spot, having to spray certainly wetting agents like crazy, still starting to get localized dry spot. So having to start to send out hand watering.
Right.
And you know what? It just all started to add up that there just wasn't something right to me. So at the time, it was suggested a year before when I had agronomist out to do my yearly sampling and kind of throwing out, try some kelp. It seems to be that stress reducer. You know what? Don't use it in the spring, or don't just before you're going to get into the heat of the season, start to use it. Well, I didn't do it the first year, but then over the course of the winter, I started to do a little bit of research when I
Right.
could sit in the office. And I started to pull up some products and I started to find out where I could get some of this stuff. And it just so happened that it led me to a company in Australia.
Right.
And I contacted them and they referred me to a company not too far away from me that was carrying their products.
Mm-hmm.
So long story short, I contacted them and they sent me to a couple other people who were actually superintendents that were starting to bring this product in.
Right. Right.
Kind of as a retirement gig for them because they wanted the product, very good product, really cheaply priced materials.
Mm-hmm.
So I got in touch with them, and I'll give a little shout out, Wayne Rath,
Right. I know Wayne.
at Magna Club, you know Wayne.
Yep.
So it was Turf Grass Solutions that started to bring the product in. So I talked to Wayne a few times and got a little information from him, and then I started to dig a little bit more, and because he was kind of digging into this product as well.
Right.
So Wayne, help me out here. Where can I find out? Where can I go to get more information on this? So he started to throw out some names. Elaine Ingham was one, and obviously it was the NTS or Nutritech Solutions. So I went on to that website and Graham Sate. And at that time, the guys had gone down to Florida and taken Graham's 5-day farm nutrition, soils, human nutrition course.
Oh, they're connected? Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Farm nutrition and human nutrition are connected. Wow.
Really?
Fascinating concept. Yeah.
Just a smidgen.
No sarcasm there at all.
No, just a fraction.
Yeah. But you're outside of the golf industry. You have to, right? You have to seek this information from outside the industry because it's really, really hard to find inside.
There's none inside. Right. And that really saddens me right now that there is none inside the golf industry.
That's why you're here, Randy. That's why you're here.
You know what? And I'm going to tick some people off, probably. And
That's
my age,
here.
At my age right now, I really don't give two craps, right?
Right.
So academia right now is leading us down the wrong tune. Mm-hmm. We've got the fork in the road, and one is, let's say, sustainability of the business, and one is taking the business to a point where it's never going to be able to return and it's not going to be a successful business.
Right.
So we all know if we get into the conventional standpoint, my God, fertilizer prices are going sky high. We're all starting to pay more for water. Hydro costs are more.
Yep.
We get disease, we spray. Disease comes back, we spray more. The same companies that we buy that product from sell us the fertilizer to make it grow more. It's a revolving wheel that really pisses me off.
Right.
Sorry to use that term. So part of that there's where my budget driven aspect comes in. So I started to do that research on my own. And I started to watch Elaine Ingham's YouTubes. I started to watch Christine Jones and her YouTube videos. And anytime I had the opportunity to watch anything that they had, be it a 2 or 3 minute or an hour and a half webinar presentation, whatever they did, I started to watch it. Then I had a gentleman that used to work for NTS in Australia. He's an Australian living in Ontario, living in Toronto right now. He saw a few of the pictures I had posted out on Twitter, where I had sprayed the biologicals, and you could see a clear-cut line on an approach. And actually, it's in the GCSAA webinar that I did. There's a little plug for that. Clear-cut line of absolutely no disease, and then dollar spot crazy.
And is this this isn't a one-time application? This is kind of program versus no program?
Bingo.
Okay.
Yeah. Program versus no program.
And that's important. I think that, I try to teach my assistants the concept that nothing good happens fast. but a whole lot of bad things can happen really, really quickly, right?
Exactly.
And you have to look at, so making one application saying, it didn't work. That's especially when you're talking regenerative, sustainable, things that are much more subtle effects. It takes some time.
Turf has no patience.
Right.
We've been taught we have no patience. You know what? If we have a problem, there's a product to solve that problem right now.
Right.
It's going to be back in 14 or 21 days. But you know what? We can solve it then too.
Right. Great.
And then we can solve it again in another 21 days.
Yep.
Well, you can solve that symptom you're seeing, but you're not solving the problem. And that is exactly what's wrong with the turf industry.
I love that.
Right now.
I love the way you put that. Yep.
So the real kicker, I've got two granddaughters that live in Australia. So I actually had the opportunity. I did a little talk with Joel Williams. The same thing. I watched some of his webinars, and he actually worked for NTS, and he was doing a little talk about biological products to a group of superintendents in Toronto. Mm-hmm. So he actually suggested that they invite me to give my little bit of a case study, because he loved that picture of the biology versus no biology. So I met Joel and found out at that time that he was one of the lead agronomists in Australia for NTS. And he suggested, and I actually asked him about the courses that Graham Sate does. Mm-hmm. He said, well, I think they do one in March, but because the seasons are flipped around, right? They do it in July and they do it in September. I'm going, well, God, we can't do that up here. I can't fly to Australia and go do this, or I can't go down, So we planned a trip to Australia to see our granddaughters. And I said, I'm going to take this course. So it was a 5-day soils nutrition, farming nutrition, human health course. Mm-hmm. And it was right at their head office in a small town called Yandina, which is north of Brisbane. Right. So 5 days I spent hotel with people from India, Australia, Mexico. There was another Canadian there. And they were all ag. Right. I was the only one coming from a turf standpoint. But I'll tell you what, life-changing experience. Right. To start to talk about soils and soil life and soil health, and then how you tie that into food nutrition, mm-hmm. how you tie that into the human health, and then how you look at every single disease that's out there now from an inflammatory aspect starts in the human gut. Right. The connection is unavoidable. Unavoidable. Yep. So we have, and that's obviously, lately we've heard probiotics and, the human gut so we've got the ability, our gut is inside us. So we have all of that going on in our stomach and in our system. But when you relay it out to a plant, the plant has no gut. The plant's gut is the soil. That's right. Right. And then the connection. So if you think about bacteria and fungi, and then you get into the nematodes and the protozoa and the ciliates, and you know what? All that's in our stomach. Right. I hope nematodes aren't, maybe not in that aspect. They probably are. Yeah, well, they probably are, right? But when you tie all that together and you start to realize that you are a part of the living system, you are actually no different than what your grass plant is. You are no different than what the tree I'm looking at out in front of my window right now. Mm-hmm. It is all part of the ecosystem. And yet conventional medicine takes the approach that conventional turf grass management or agriculture takes. How big a hammer can we hit this with to get rid of the symptom, right? Bingo. Instead of addressing what's really at the root cause of your issues. And then, of course, we have our big pharma companies that come in, and I won't mention any of them. We all know them. And every year they spend more money trying to develop new products, which are a bigger hammer to try and hit the new stuff that is appearing.
Right.
And it is a never-ending, it's a never-ending ball rolling down the hill.
Yeah. Yep.
And until you realize that you have to look at a real solution to the problem, you're never going to get rid of the problem.
Okay, so let's get into that then. Let's talk turf and how, so you've got all this newfound information. So where do you start? Where did you what was step one and the timeline and the challenges? Because just like a farmer takes on a field and he's in transition from conventional to organic, there's some painful moments in there. What did you learn?
I'll take a year or two step back, because that was the time frame when Mika Woods came out with the MLSN aspect and growth potential. So that's where I kind of started a little bit of a flip. So rather than thinking about going out on a calendar-based application of the NPK, I started to collect the clippings, and I started to go more on when the clippings were dropping down, and I started to find that data line that I could play with where it was good recovery. That's when I started to play with, okay, now maybe I need to put a little N out. And that soon progressed to the aspect of now I can put a little less N out, because I was noting that I could still get the same product with less N than what I was doing before.
But you're still largely in the synthetic.
I'm still basically largely in the synthetic aspect.
Okay.
So
I like it.
Yeah. So then I started to go, okay, well, maybe the next year when I go back to that point about the kelp, I'll start adding some kelp in. So I had a couple of greens where environmental issues as well. I was having to put a buffalo blower out by one green, and a sign up there telling golfers, please don't turn this off when you're playing. I didn't have it roaring and ripping. I had it on low idle, just trying to,
there's some stuff. Yeah.
Just air circulation. I bought 2 fans for another, like not turf fans, Let's go up here to our car parts, like a Napa auto dealers. And I want 2 kind of industrial fans. And then I had to go buy a generator because we have no power. And you know what? Yeah, did it make a difference? Maybe, maybe not. But at least the effort was there, right?
Right.
A lot of those times we just have to put the effort to show that we're trying, and we know,
Air, water, light, right?
Yeah, right?
You got to make sure those are addressed.
So I started to play with the kelp, and I started to play with humic acid. So and this time frame would be 2014.
Okay, that's where I was putting this.
Right?
Yeah.
So thus dropping down my N inputs, dropping down even the cultivation aspect on the greens, because
the N inputs were they were based on data you were pulling in, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good.
Right. Just like most guys are doing now, collect clippings and you go through that process.
You bet.
So I started to back off on all the cultivation along with that, because okay, conventional, I've been top dressing and verticutting and aerating and doing all these processes, and all I've been seeing is a downhill slide.
So where did you come up with that concept? This is a leading question because I think I know. You didn't just dream that up.
I don't know if I did or whether I was smart enough at the time to know it was coming from somewhere else.
Okay.
I think my mindset was just, I'm doing all this stuff. Why am I doing it? So I'm going to stop. And like guys called me crazy after I kind of started to throw this out, because oh, where did you start this transition? I hope it was on a tee or on a fairway. No, I started this transition on 21 greens,
Right.
right? Because I really felt that I couldn't get any worse with it.
Your control was
So,
the neighbor's course, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So I immediately stopped even thinking about pulling a core. I immediately stopped throwing sand on the surface. Dan Dinelli, our good buddy Dan Dinelli. We all know how Dan, and I talked to him once uh, at a GCS AA talk that he gave when he was thinking about, it's time to rebuild these greens. It's time to go through the process that he was going through. And the comment he made to me is, so we spend $25,000 to build a green to USGA specs.
One green.
One green.
Yeah.
Then we immediately put turf on top of it, which debunks the USGA green, because the green is the green without the green. As soon as you put the turf on it, you've taken the USGA green and it's not a USGA green anymore.
Right, because they're only looking at the growing medium.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Then you start to put a sand top dressing on top of the green you just spent $25,000 on,
which may or may not be the same as what you built it out of.
Bingo, right?
Yeah.
So all of that started to fly around in my head, and I'm going, you know what? There's something wrong with this whole situation that we're playing with here. And again, that was the time when all the promotion of fast and firm, more sand, top dressing, bi-weekly, top dressing with fertilizer spreaders, and top dressing. Like, what the hell are you guys doing?
Right.
And why are you doing it? Well, firm and fast.
We've always done it that way.
Always done it that way. You know what? But now we're being pushed by an association to say, that's what we need to do to make it firm and fast. Well, I go back to my greens when they were only a year, 2, 3 years old, and they were rock hard, firm, fast. Why? Because I didn't have thatch. So we start to grow it in the conventional system. We start to build up thatch. And I won't say organic matter. I will say thatch.
Right.
So we start to build up that heavy lignin. We start to build up that material that doesn't break down. And then in comes the old dilution is the solution.
Back to Dan Dinelli again, right?
Exactly.
I think his comments and concepts were 5 years ahead of everybody else. Really good.
And then I see Dan's video
of the ball bouncing on the
the ball bounce
on
the fairway with compost top dress and sand top dress. And I'm going, aha, baby. this is where as a good, another person that I've yet to mention, and I guess a very fond friend of Joel's and of anybody in Earthworks, is Mr. Jerry Brunetti.
Right.
When you start to think about dilution is the solution, and you start to think about thatch and infiltration and all of that process, you start to think, oh my God, organic matter is bad. Thus, the only way for us to really get rid of it is to pull cores out, disrupt that surface, and for the love of God, why would you ever pull a core out of a green, completely shovel that up and take it away, and then spend a crap load of money to throw tons and tons of sand on to fill those holes back up with new sand?
That's lifeless again.
I don't really think sand goes bad. So why are we taking the sand away and putting new sand in?
Right.
Like, does it get dirty or something?
Sand go bad. Yeah. We need some research on that. Does sand go bad?
So all of those things, my mind is just going a million miles an hour
Sure.
with all of this stuff as I'm progressing on kind of in the first couple years where I'm realizing that, you know what, humic acid and kelp were the foundation for me to begin with.
Yeah.
And then I started to realize, and a little bit of research would come out that I'd see, well, if you're adding that carbon source, you're going to be able to drop your N rates down. So I started to drop N rates down. And so this is where I'll pull it back into a fairway standpoint now.
Right.
So I'm certainly pulling the N down on greens. I'm certainly pulling N down on most of the golf course. But my program on fairways prior to getting the biology going on fairways, which was basically 4 years behind me jumping in headstrong on greens. So I went greens. The second year, immediately I started on tees because the benefits were just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then it came down to more of a labory type aspect from a fairway point, because having to take the humic acid granules and melt them down, like I could do it on a small scale basis for tees and greens. You know, I'd melt it up with hot water and a drill with a paint mixer on the bottom,
Sure.
and away we'd go, put it in, and everything was cool. But when I started to do a couple applications on fairways, you know, the traditional 2/10 of a pound or 1/4 pound every 3 weeks, which, you know, was, I thought, you know, reasonable,
Yeah.
the way things were growing. But, you know, I was still collecting clippings. So I had buckets on my fairway mowers. And my God, you know what, going from, you know, dumping 3 or 4 or 5 times on each fairway and then having to go back out and pick that up, and having Cushman loads or tractor trailer loads being taken off the golf course, to the point where I still had buckets on, but I was dropping my N rate from 1/4 down to 2/10. Then I dropped it down to 0.15. Then I dropped it down to 1/10 of a pound every 3 weeks on fairways.
With the same response.
With the exact same response, so much so that turf looked great, color was fantastic, recovery was good. I got to the point where I was thinking, God, my staff, I told them not to throw their buckets in the fescue. You know, and I'm getting all set to go rip them and saying, you know what, I don't want that mess in the fescue. I don't want those clippings there. We're not. We're just not getting the clippings off the fairways anymore. So that was the second little bit of aha. You know what? I'm still having the same recovery. I'm still having the look. The turf is still fantastic condition. My inputs have dropped way down. And this is only with the introduction of some humic acid and some kelp, let alone going further onto the program that I've already got going on the tees and greens, where, you know, by this point in time, 2017 to 18, absolutely no dollar spot at all on greens, no dollar spot on tees. I'd still go out and spray a winter fungicide, certainly because I had to keep my job. You know what? Nobody had done that yet, really backed off on all of those processes, especially on a full bent grass golf course.
Sure.
So by the time 2019 rolled around and I had taken the NTS course and really had a big understanding of the whole soil biology process. Like, I thought I was doing okay listening to Elaine Ingham, you know, cakes and cookies and, you know, starting the exudates and whatnot. But when I took that 5-day course and we got heavy into bacteria, then we got heavy into fungi, and specifically,
I didn't share my outline with you, but I think you're following it pretty closely here, because I want to talk about that.
Well, that's just what it is, right?
Yeah.
Great minds go down the same line here.
Apparently so.
You know, and then AMF, okay, arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, which now are called VMF. And now that, you know what, regardless, mycorrhiza. And then we looked at, okay, where's the next step in the soil food web? And at that time, it really wasn't the soil food web that was in my mind. This was just soil biology.
Right. Right.
Okay, Elaine Ingham, you know what? You look at her stuff, oh, soil food web, and okay, I don't really get it, you know. Okay, but I know bacteria now, I know fungi now. I know you're talking about protozoa and you're talking about ciliates and flagellates, and then you get into, you know, the nematodes and the fact that of all the nematodes out there, you'd be lucky if there's 20% that are bad nematodes. And you know what? Oh, all you hear in turf is, oh, nematodes. Oh God, let's kill them.
Right.
You know what? And my whole mindset really started to shift around to the fact of we as humans have been screwing up this whole system.
Because we can.
Pardon me?
Because we can.
Oh, because we can.
Doesn't make it right, but we do it because we can.
Right? Because we're the hierarchy. We're kind of at the top of that ladder, right? We can do whatever the hell we want.
And just because you can doesn't mean you should, right?
Well, you know what? And I think that's where the line is coming right now.
Yeah.
We all certainly know about the whole CO2 in the atmosphere and climate change talks and all of that sort of deal. You know, again, it's like, oh my God, people, okay. If you start to think about the carbon cycle, you know what, you can't gain any more carbon anywhere. The carbon that's in the system right now has been there since Earth evolved. Right. It just moves from the soil to a plant to the air.
Yeah.
But what we as humans have screwed up over the last 100 years now is the fact that we're letting it all go up into the air.
We've burned it out.
We've burned it out.
Yeah.
So, you know what, when I started to get into, and this was again Australia, because the conversations are obviously no-till or limited till, and you know, keeping the carbon in the ground, and starting to work with the microbial populations, and starting to see the disease control with specific organisms, and starting to see the nutrient value of the food go up, and you know what, it all started to make a hell of a lot more sense to me. And I really started to be able to tie it to the turf and the human body.
Right.
So I guess way back, I had a little bit of a jump start on the human body standpoint, because here I am a superintendent and I have the worst environmental allergies you can even think about.
Mm-hmm.
Went and got tested, and I was allergic to grass, to pollen, to ragweed, to trees, to dust, to you name it.
Me too.
Right? So of course it was weekly shots, one in the left arm 1 week, one in the right arm, you know. And then I read an article from a holistic food store, and it started to talk about specific supplements.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get the supplements, you know, your immune system will start to adapt, it'll start to build, you'll start to be able to fight off all of this on your own. So I had already gone through that from a personal standpoint, because I absolutely have no issues with allergies now, and I have not for many, many, many years. I look back now and I relate everything going, you know what, I'm high doses of vitamin C, I'm high doses of vitamin D, I'm taking, you know, all these other, and everybody goes, you're freaking nuts. Well, am I? You know what?
Is that because you didn't take the easy route?
I guess. You know what? I'm not sick. I've never missed a day of work in my life.
Right, right.
You know what? I have absolutely no ailments. I think I'm doing pretty good. So
I like being nuts.
yeah, you know, so when I really started to tie all that together and pull the ag aspect into the turf.
Right. Okay, so let's get back before we forget and before we run out of time, apparently. I told you this would go quick. So let's get back to the whole concept of, and we probably won't do it justice, but two things. I want to talk a little more about mycorrhiza. I also want to talk about your experience, because this is likely new for a lot of people in the turf industry, but there is, going back to Dr. Ingham, John Quinn's work in the UK as far as his disturbance.
Exactly.
So that encouraging, and I know you do a lot with compost tea and things like that to encourage the fungal populations in the soil. Relate that to what grows more readily. In other words, and you've got annual grasses versus perennial grasses. How, make that connection for the audience.
Okay, so this is where we get into.
And can you confirm that this works?
Oh, I can confirm that it works, and this is where you academics can take a peek at it. And a young lady that I have listened to quite a bit in the last year and a half, called Nicole Masters out of New Zealand, who now works integrity soils in Montana.
Yep.
Brilliant lady. Love the accent as well, and
yes.
That's what kind of pulled me in. But when you start to think about the ecology aspect, so there is a succession of plant life.
Right.
So when we started out with lichen and moss, when there was absolutely nothing in growing, and that started to give you a little bit of an organic aspect. And then you started to get into annual weeds, and you started to get into annual grasses, and then you started to get into some perennial aspects.
Prairie grasses. And
right.
Like that. Yeah. And then
so when we start to look at the fungal to bacterial ratios, so when we start to think about bacteria is going to be there regardless.
Right.
You know what? They are never going away. They're never going anywhere. It's basically, it's virus, right? It's like a virus. It's bacteria. So when you have, as I like to say, an inert growing media, it is bacterial dominant.
Yep.
And you tend to grow. So bacterial dominant, inert, very, very low organic matter. So you're growing annual weeds, and you start to grow annual grasses. As you start to build up the organic matter, and I will say, I'm going to make a differentiation here. So you say humus,
yep.
Or for all of us in the turf world, I think you can think about it and say organic matter versus organic material.
Yeah. Well, you use the term ligneous material too. And we use that a lot at Earthworks because that's the separation. Humus is good. Ligneous material is undigested. It's just not good yet.
Exactly.
Right.
So you know what? Throwing green grass clippings back down is great. That is going to be a very quickly digestible, turn into the humus, be great organic material. The thatch, the dead roots, the lignin, bad. You can't break it down if you're in a bacterial situation.
Right.
So when you start to think about bacteria and fungi are the basis of that system. So as you progress along that ecological succession of plants, so does the bacterial to fungal ratio start to change. So this is where we can also get into the annual bluegrass versus perennial bentgrass.
Right.
So it goes back again to my thoughts of we built that golf course and we planted it with a perennial stand of turf through seed. But then I start to treat it like an annual crop by continually spraying fungicides, continually setting back any soil life activity by using synthetic salt-based fertility. So what you're doing is shutting down any soil life. First off, it doesn't have to be there because you're providing everything that the so-called plant needs, or what we think the plant needs.
And we need the bacteria to break down the synthetic N in the first place.
Exactly.
So you're just, you're perpetuating that.
So bacteria, annual bluegrass. Why am I top dressing? Why am I continuing to add sand, a bacterial-based component, to a perennial system that I want to have?
Right.
So what happens to start creeping in? Well, of course, annual bluegrass.
Yep.
Why? Because you're favoring that growing media for that component. So we spray fungicides, kills all the fungal population. that is the biggest problem we have, is that we are so dependent on fungicides to kill disease organisms,
Right.
fungi.
Right.
But you don't realize you're killing all the fungi, and fungi are needed to be part of that process. They are actually becoming the dominant part of the soil food web process. So,
and we've got a tremendous opportunity versus agriculture because we are essentially a no-till environment. So we've got an opportunity to build a fungal population. We just don't know how to do it.
well, I think the only problem that we run into in turf is that we have a monoculture stand.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
So that's our only downfall. So thus when I hear PhDs talk or come back to a comment that I make on Twitter, oh, there's more than enough biology in a golf green. Well, no, there isn't. There may be plenty of bacterial biology, but there is absolutely no fungal biology because we've killed it all off and we haven't given it the conditions to live in.
Similar to a good carbon to nitrogen ratio, we need a good fungal to bacterial balance in that soil.
Exactly, right? So that's when I started to look at, we need to do the inoculant aspect because our situation does not lead to a growth in fungal population.
Right.
So obviously, when you start to think about putting out a fungal dominated inoculant, be a vermicompost extract or a compost tea that you brewed to become a little bit more fungal dominant, then you also need to provide the food for it because the food isn't readily there for it in a sand system. So thus is where your humic acid comes in. It's where your fish hydrolysis comes in, your kelp comes in. Even if you're doing a brew, you can throw in some oats, right?
Yeah.
Because that's fungal food.
Right.
So what you want to do is you want to try and put the food in the soil so that you can grow your fungal population that you're trying to inoculate.
You may not know this, but you just described the base of all of our liquid products. We put all of that together, and there's a reason. Jerry Brunetti knew what he was doing. He didn't stumble on that by accident.
Oh my God! You know what? I don't know how many times I've listened to his, and if I'm mistaken, 2009 Acres USA. I think he gave a talk. Soil as supraorganism.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Fractal geometry and just the energy of life forms, and there is energy in rock. And you know what? I don't know how many times I've listened to that, and
not enough.
No, not enough. Not enough at all.
It's like his book. I told Joel that I've never had a book with so many dog-eared pages on it. I swear half the pages are dog-eared.
Yeah.
I need to get back to that. I need to get back to that. There's so much to it.
You know, and
I think that's one of the things that academia struggles with because they have, in order to analyze, they've got to isolate. And internally, we call it reductionist science. You have to reduce it to something you can actually measure and see.
Yes.
It doesn't work that way in nature.
No, it doesn't. And as humans, we have absolutely no problem, let's say, acknowledging big as in size.
Right.
Okay. Because we're big ourselves in terms of life. So we have no problem looking at a big house, a big mountain, a big truck. We have no problem in looking at things that are of substantial size. But we have absolutely no understanding, as Jerry says, the fractal geometry aspect of the life in the soil. And I absolutely love the comment when he states, if you start out the border in Canada, and I'm trying to remember the, I don't know, but anyway, make your way down the coast into Maine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right. And he says, okay, so
blocking the shoreline.
Yeah. So drive the highway, drive the shoreline. Okay. Then start to actually walk the water's edge as a human. then start to think about a bacteria or a worm or a doing the exact same thing. And you start to think about, you know what, as he says, fractal geometry, it's infinite. We cannot understand that,
Right.
which is why we don't get it. Right? Because we can't understand something that small.
And because we're so big oriented, like you say, I think a lot of times we can't help ourselves and just get out of the way and provide the environment that's right so that the system can run itself. I use this term all the time in my presentations. I want us to get to the point where the soil is working for us rather than us working for the soil, because it all starts there. Like you said, that's the gut of the system.
Yep.
Okay. So we're almost out of time. We did not get to everything, but I want you to talk for a couple minutes on specifically get back to thatch, get back to lignous breakdown and how that works in your program and your approach to things.
So 7 years into my program on greens.
And are you top dressing at all?
I do the cheap man's greens cover in November up here in Ontario.
Yep.
I do I don't want to say it's not a heavy top dress. It is, I don't know, a mid top dress. And I don't even, I don't pay attention to how much sand. Let's put it this way. I can get a triaxle load of sand delivered, and I only use about maybe a little over half of it.
Okay.
So it's really not that much of a cover.
So, but you just want to protect the crown.
Just want a little root protection on the crown. And that is the only top dress that I have done for 6+ years now.
Okay. So now Randy, that's impossible. You can't control thatch that way.
Oh, I know you can't.
So how do you do it?
You're just diluting the solution, right? So my process has been humic acid, the kelp, hardly any nitrogen going down at all. And I'm talking, I may go out every 3 weeks to a month with 0.05 pounds of urea. I use absolutely nothing else but a urea. 4600 melt me down. Trichoderma. So trichoderma is the key to that aspect, being in a fungi.
Is this throughout the season?
Sorry, me?
This is throughout the growing season?
This is throughout the growing season.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Likewise on tees. And I have done it on fairways, and I'll lead into a very, I'm going to say it maybe blow some people's minds about trichoderma on a fairway standpoint, but I have no thatch on my greens. So I have gone, I'm old enough to know that when back in the 70s, 80s, 3% organic matter on a green was norm. That's what you were trying to accomplish, right? If you were 5, you were high.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I think we have to break the mindset of getting down to 1 or 1.5. We need to get back up into that 2.5 to 3.
Well, but it's got to be the right OM.
But it's got to be the right OM. Exactly. And our problem today is that we're killing off everything and we're diluting the solution with sand top dressing. And all we're doing is thickening that thatch layer.
Right.
Water repellent thatch layer where we're having to send everybody out to hand water because water can't get through it.
Mm-hmm.
So I have virtually zero thatch on my greens. I have people walk out there in the middle of summer on my greens and it's like, oh my God, these things, I can actually feel these. These are hard. These are firm. Don't have a lot of ball marks anymore. And I have no problem getting a speed of 10.5 mowing at 120, 125.
So getting back to, I don't want to belabor this point, but you started with MLSN.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think Joel's kind of hijacked from me, but one of the things that I like to talk about with my clients is, there's nothing wrong with less as long as it's the right less.
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And just less for the sake of less is going to cause its own problems. But if you get the system working like yours is, you just get out of the way, right?
Well, I have not applied a phosphorus product in probably 9 years.
Okay.
I have no issues with it. I do not apply any synthetic K products. I don't put a K mag down. I don't spray K. The only K that goes into my process is what's part of my kelp, right? Which is basically, when you look at the kelp, it's, I don't know, 0.5, and maybe 6% K, just
Right.
because of the potassium.
Silicate.
Exactly, right. And the hydroxide aspect to break it down and make it work. So
Sure.
I apply N, and then I apply trace elements. I do not apply NPK. I think we've got that all wrong. We are so dependent on NPK, right? And that's where the MLSN comes in, and where Mika, don't worry. No, the micros and the traces, don't even think about that. Well, if you don't have those, then most of the enzymatic processes that are going on within that plant are not happening.
Because it's not happening in the soil.
Because it's not happening in the soil.
Right. We're in the plant box and we need to be in the soil box. And somehow the boxes need to be side by side. And we're not there.
No, we're under our current situations, we are absolutely nowhere near there.
Right.
So when I think about my fertility program right now is probably 20 bags of urea a year, humic acid, kelp. I've played around with diatomaceous earth. I have silica is a pretty big component. Paying a little bit more attention to the calcium and boron aspect, and then really heavy with the trace elements. And I don't mean heavy amounts, because all it takes is, we talk about parts per million when we're into soil aspects with most of our, but you get into a trace element and you're talking parts per trillion.
Right.
Because all you need to do is get that one little drop out there, which will kickstart the process within the soil food web and within the biology to take over and start to run. But if you don't have those trace elements there, you're not going to have the connection. You're not going to have the soil working. You're not going to have the plant working. The plant's going to be dependent on your synthetics. You're going to be making a plant human dependent,
right?
Which is what we have done.
Ooh, I like that.
Right?
I don't like it, but I like it. Yeah, that's a great way to look at it.
But another issue is, so what we do right now, so a great little comparison. So what we have done with all of our turf over the last 40, 50, 60 years plus, because we've told it to go lay down on the couch. And then we keep bringing it food.
We'll bring you whatever you need, right?
Oh, we'll bring you what we think you need.
Yeah, in excess.
Right, in excess. We'll just keep bringing it.
Yeah.
And what happens? So again, take that back to the human standpoint. If I was to go lay on that couch and have my wife do nothing but bring me potato chips and pop and junk food and chicken wings and all of that, you want to know something? I'm not going to be able to move. I'm not going to be healthy. I'm going to be dependent on that food and the medicine that will be necessary to keep my heart pumping.
Exactly.
Right. So that's exactly what we've done to the whole turf system.
Yeah.
And when you start to take a step back and realize, and I think a lot of the research coming out now is that, the mycorrhizal network, the underground internet, plants communicate with each other. Plants will tell another plant that there is something coming down the pipeline. Prepare yourself for it. Right. And like we're the stupid ones.
Yep. Yep.
Right?
There's
We
lots.
think we think we are the smart ones, but I'll tell you what, we're the stupid ones because plants are sitting back and unfortunately we're making them sick. But if you go out into nature itself, tell you what, it's a pretty smooth running machine.
Well, you look at your dog eating grass in the backyard. Why is he eating grass? Because he knows, his system knows it needs something that's in that grass, and we can't figure that out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right.
We're-
So we are long on time. I can definitely tell that we've got another hour in us at some point, and
Oh,
I've got a number of things as far as programmatic ideas that you've employed, and I want to dive into that, but this is probably more than most can digest in an hour and 10 minutes actually. But Randy Booker, thank you so much for not only for being here, but for the work you've done and honestly sticking your neck out. I'm sure you've had some arrows flying at you, but to stick your neck out and be willing to take these chances and share with everybody. I know you're very active on Twitter, and you share a lot of good data from outside the golf industry, which is like we said at the outset of this, it's where we can glean most of the really valuable information in this regard.
well, Kevin, if you look at it, a plant is a plant is a plant.
Right.
Right? Whether it is in a prairie field or whether it is corn being grown or whether it is our bent grass greens, it is a living organism just as we are. So I think if we start to respect the fact that we are not the ruler of that kingdom and we are just part of the process,
Keepers of it.
it becomes a lot easier to work down this line. And, one last word I will say is that this works. Yes, you need some patience. It takes a little bit of time, but for the most part, you are going to be the only one that notices the slight little bit of change that happens in the first year or two.
Right.
Nobody else will really notice it. Right. We as superintendents are very, very picky at that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
And believe me, you will notice some of those little downfalls that might tweak you to say, I don't really know if I want to continue with this, but continue.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you what, you will reap the benefits. I'll just finish. Last year, I did not spray a winter snow mold product on 28 and a half acres of my bent grass here in Southern Ontario.
Wow.
And I got very, very small, little superficial pink, basically when the snow melted in April. Absolutely nothing else.
Proof is in the pudding.
Proof's in the pudding. It works with the budget. It works with Mother Nature. And if anybody wants to contact me and with any questions, I am willing, able, and more than welcome. And I would love to come back and have another chat with you again.
We will. We absolutely will. We just scratched the surface. Randy Booker, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate everything you've done. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on the Earthworks podcast. And be sure to subscribe if you want to get more of this.
Good. Thanks, Kevin.
You bet.